7 or 8 minutes here.
Okay, yeah, we'll do it quick.
Over there. We'll go this way.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Yes.
It's very warm.
okay, actually, I will do a lot back in my
Well, we took the liberty to fill the quilts and cover the cases just till another hour or two. But can you start here?
Certainly, yeah. So, as I told you, my background is in fiber art. I learned to quilt from my grandmother, and so I also collect quilts. It's just as important for me to, you know, sort of keep the history going in terms of this wonderful craft. You know, it's a very feminine craft. And as I took a class from some Amish women one time, and she said there are as many ways to quilt as there are quilters. This is a crazy quilt, just turn of the century, and they literally said it was called a crazy quilt because men couldn't understand why their wives would just go nuts making them. And that really is where the term crazy quilt. And I'm going to assume that it might be one of the few things that they could control in their realm, you know, of time and space, use any color and, you know, any pattern. And I think, you know, all of them are absolutely incredible. So I do collect them. And
Well,
truly love them.
we've heard this, love one another since we were this, but it's still, the message still is like smacking against the wall. It's worse now than ever that this is not being done. But Dottie encourages us, even though there's holes in our society, a huge one, we love one another. So, thanks, Dottie.
Exactly, and I do restorations as well. So, well, the only other thing that I wanted to say about quilting too is what makes it a really unique art form is that you can continue it. You know, no other art form has something where you continue it. If that sculpture didn't get done, if that painting didn't get done, it never gets done. With quilting, it's an honor for a quilter to take your piece forward, to take your quilt blocks and finish them. So I love the democratic, you know, background and aesthetics of quilting. So, up here, so this room is sort of filled with my personal collections from my own, you know, I guess journey with art and artists. So a lot of my friends are in here and reflected. Some of you may know Laura Jean's work, McLaughlin. If you've been near the zoo and seen that wall of mosaics, that is Laura Jean, which is really, you know, she just does absolutely beautiful mosaics. This was a wonderful street artist named Blitz. I just love his work. Some of you may know Penny Mateer, who does these wonderful vote signs. You've probably seen these stuck in the ground all over the Pittsburgh. I called her up after one election and said, so do you go back around and pick those up, Penny? And she was like, oh no. So now I'm like, the next day I'm driving around, you know, looking for them so I can snatch them. But so I did get a few of these.
And Penny will be in show number
what, 9?
8.
Oh, 8.
You know, she along with Cosmo Vinyl, it's a resistance show, so
Okay.
come on back.
We're looking forward to that. I also have a love of public art. I love the idea of, you know, groups of people coming together to make art. And this is from I guess a project that Bob Ziller did. Bob was actually here, and I'm going to have him talk a little bit about this and how it was created in terms of, you know, public participation.
It was kind of just off the top of my head. I was asked to have my studio be used for a fundraiser for raising money for bicycles for an orphanage in India. And I just suggested off the top of my head, well, why don't we make artwork out of bicycles and then sell the artwork to raise money? And we did that. I just laid out rolls of paper in my studio. At the time, I had a huge 6,500 square foot space over on Penn Avenue in Garfield. So during First Fridays, I would just have the space open. And basically, I just taped a paper on the ground, 3 rolls of long sheets, like 30 feet long, and got some tricycles and other bicycles, and set up paint trays, and we paint the tires with like a 2-inch roller, and people would ride across the paper. And the results were better than anything I ever expected. And this particular piece was from years later, which was done in Wilkinsburg, and it was mostly kids who were like less than 10 years old and with mostly tricycles. And that was done at Community Forge. And then I just cut them down and framed them, and they're nice like home pieces. And I also did a workshop at the Children's Museum back in 2012 with pieces on canvas that were like 6 feet wide and 25 feet long. I did 4 days there. And I was recently contacted a few months ago. The airport sent me an email and asked for information about paintings of mine they had out there. And I was like, well, what are you talking about? I had no idea. When I did the workshop at the Children's Museum, they had asked me for some paintings for a display, and I just gave them some works on paper since the 25-foot canvases were too big. And somehow they ended up migrating out to the airport, and they'd been out there since like 2016 without me ever knowing about it. But
I love that when that happens. And one of the things I just wanted to say too quickly is that one of the things I like about the way Pat curates, which is like absolutely incredible, and you know there's 9 of these. For those of you who don't know, I'm number 6 of 9, is that he's not only interested in the artist, he's interested in the whole artist. So it's not just our work, it's, you know, who informs us, who are our friends and associates that we've worked with, you know, who do we collect? So a lot of us artists collect other artists, and that's what this room is. So that you get the full story, you get the holistic story of the artist, and not just, you know, my work, but who informs my work and who is, you know, associated in my journey as an artist.
Well, we wanted to know.
You want to do this?
So, yeah, just real quickly, because we're gonna move to the other room. This is Norman Brown, another incredible.
Norman was here last night.
Norman was here last night. This is a street artist. Jamie Acey. He lives and works in the Hill District, and I love this when I saw it. And I said, you know, you've got to do more of this kind of work, because he doesn't often get canvases. So he was very fortunate, you know, to get this, and then I felt fortunate to buy it. But every time I look at it, I think things you can't do anymore, you know. So to me, it harkens back into a freer time when, you know, you could almost safely hitchhike anywhere in the country. So,
But let's go over here.
Sure. Yeah.
I think it's this.
Oh, okay.
He's someone that should be a group A person. We met him. He was in one show.
Doesn't wear a stencil,
Oh, yeah.
So I've never heard
Like she'll like point out something and then point to the thing on the other side of the room.
Yeah, it is.
Well, if we're on the chairs, feel free to sit on the floor.
And you can sit on the fabric, that don't worry about anything that's sitting on the chair. If you see a quilt or whatever, enjoy.
Well, we brought everything here And it was a jumbo on the table, although Fred likes a jumbo, I thought I could start somewhere. So, all the roosters were here. And generally, I like to place, you know, a work of some importance or some visual something. But once I saw this, I thought, man, that rooster's really walking here. So this is my first thing I did in the entire floor up here, and I really like it. And I also really like what's happening down here. Even though there's a lot of work, once you start putting it out, you see like, oh, there's still a lot of wall space.
That's true.
So
every
the show.
5 minutes, Pat was saying, "What else have you got? What else have you got?"
So, I forget what, it was a couple weeks ago you were here, and the show was only downstairs. Lexi Bishop only
Yeah.
curated downstairs. That was the night before the storm that's still out there, the snow. So, Paul Cusick had brought some of John Herman's work out, and Christine just saw, they were these, but there were only a couple,
Yeah, like 3, I think.
replaced them and stuff. But she said, oh, I like these. So, so this is what we've done. There were about 50 of these paintings that John Herman did, probably somewhere between 1911 to 1920 or something,
Yeah,
when
to
he
1920.
would take excursions from here from Bellevue and go down through probably the Carolinas and down eventually to Florida. And these are scenes that he saw, and some are actually from postcards. I don't know how many are from postcards or how many are his compositions. And you want to speak a little bit of the work? Because you picked it.
Because, yeah, I did. And I always have loved, country life and rural life, and I think these are just so beautifully rendered. In fact, last evening, a woman came to me and she said, did you realize that there is racist work in your exhibition? And I said, yes, and I requested it. To me, the history, although history is history, so that's first and foremost. And the other thing, it's not always pretty. And he was a man of his times, but even so, the work is so respectfully and beautifully done, which to me supersedes, so many other things. And I feel that these depictions of the life, I think they're truthful.
Well, we were
And
talking
they're
yesterday,
also-
you and I were talking over in the corner yesterday.
Yeah.
And my first trip to the South was 1969 on the way to the Mardi Gras and going through Mississippi, and some of the housing back in the country was not all that different than what you see here.
Yeah,
And,
we did
I
talk
would
about
think
that.
that
Life
in-
has not changed.
in
The
2020
South moves very slowly.
2026, we'll see some of the same things, but to see the people out there working, it was such hard work.
It was.
All this backbreaking work. And I remember reading James Brown's biography, autobiography, and he said that his father would take him out to the to the forest, the pine forest, and his father would be like these fellows are doing, I believe, stripping and getting the pine tar from the trees, and to I guess make turpentine. And James Brown said that he would be left there alone in this shanty like this, and he said that he would go underneath it, and he said the ants and the bugs were his friends. I mean, so there's James Brown who lived this existence, and like, whoa, and here it is on our walls.
And also the very fact that although this time seems so far away, if you really think about it, it's not that far back. When I used to talk to my grandmother when she was quilting, and we would have conversations about, her parents and her parents' parents and what have you. And I said, well, what year were you born? And she said, 1898. And I remember literally coughing because because I realized that the Civil War ended in 1865,
And
which literally, she was only one generation from slavery.
And John Herman, he was born in 1855.
So he was literally
So
born
he's
during
a
those
10-year-old
times.
at the end of the Civil War,
Yes,
so he would have, childhood, he would know it. His whole life he knows Civil War because
He would have lived
he
through
was
it.
living.
Live through it. But to have this body of work, the fact that he took his time to go, down and to document, this they're absolutely incredible.
Well, a little more
And the
about
fact that they were-
John Herman.
Himself, yeah, the
Because-
namesake of the museum, by the way, this is his work, so Johnny Herman.
So Paul Cusick knows the background, that he lived a couple blocks over this way. He was in financial something or other and some family business, but he always wanted to paint, and he actually painted with, some of you might know the scalp level painters, George Hetzel, Hellman, and all that. He was not one of the big 6 or 7, but he painted with them, and he painted 1,000 paintings, never sold any. He was a bachelor, and he traveled. He went to Europe. In those cases are ivories and bronzes that he bought in his travels. And in the late 30s, he bought the Dewar's Mansion, which is down a few blocks where the Coons Bakery is. And he bought that, and that was to be his museum. And before he got it over in 1940, opened up in 1940, he passed away. But he willed 1,000 of his works to Bellevue, not to the government of Bellevue, but the people who lived here. And I'm not sure how that works, but somehow, since 1976, this building, this house museum, has been the repository of his work. And for years and years, it was a very sleepy, Paul said maybe 80 people a year would venture in. And I remember when I've known about this for at least 40 years, this museum, because I was a delivery guy, and I would go past, if I was in Bellevue, I'd say, sign for a museum, what? So one day I stopped in, and it was open, and I saw his work, I saw the watercolors I liked, and then, and another time I stopped by, and a fellow I happened to know, he was here earlier, Larry, is a conservator, he lives a couple doors down. And he said, yeah, I'll show you some stuff. So we went upstairs, he took me upstairs, opened a closet, and here were these paintings in there. And I thought, wow. I said, these are something. These are really something, because I like self-taught, and he didn't go to art school, and I had that sense of what he was up to, his work. And so I would, 40 years ago till now, I was stopping every once in a while, like every 10, 12 years, or 5 or 6 years. And then a couple years ago, I stopped in, and Paul had become the director, and they started to do local shows here of children's art, or this artist, that artist. And I said, well, I'm an art collector. And he said, oh, well, if you ever want to do anything, let me know. So some time went by, I stopped in maybe a year or so later. I said, well, what do you have coming up, Paul? He said, well, in October I have the kids, and then in November there's Sam, he's going to do a show. He said, but nobody wants to do anything in the winter. I said, well, I'll do something, I will. So that's how it started 2 years ago, when I did the 8 exhibitions in 8 weeks for my personal collection. And then last year, Marty O'Brien, who's a collector, who came to my shows, he liked what he saw, and he did his collection here for the whole winter, and he's building a foundation up here in Bellevue. And so then Paul asked me if I wanted to do anything this summer sometime, and I thought, man, it's so much work. it's incredible. Do I want to do that? And then I also had a little conversation with myself, saying, do you want to put 100% having that guy and the horror show in your head, or would you like to stay busy with something and do something uplifting and something positive? So I chose to go ahead and take on the burden of, along with Meg, because she does a lot of the heavy lifting too. So we did it, and I don't regret, for a second, because it's just so phenomenal to have you here and run us through your life of creativity. So we want to thank you all for coming, and, so it's 6, so we'll see you next week, and next
And the
week.
week after.
Yes, I do. Of course I do. Tell me your name. L-A-U-R-I.
I'm sorry. With the outfit, I think it is.
Yeah, he had to show.
Next week is